Just logging on, there's a chat in the chat box encouraging all of you to share where you're from and just introducing and saying hello to all of us. It looks like we have participants from all over Georgia. I've written down that we've got Pulaski County in the room. We have Polk County. We have Greene County and Athens, Georgia represented. I see Bleckley County is in the room. Welcome, Danette. And Warren County. We also have members of our Georgia PBIS specialist team. We have Department of Education team members here. We have several visiting from out of state. I noticed Illinois, I noticed Arizona, and as well as international. We have someone from Argentina as well as UK logged into today's webinar. And I'm loving that all of you are sharing the different counties. We are well represented from Toombs County, McDuffie County, Candler County, DeKalb County, DFACS, and we've got our Deal Center team, Amy Reddick and Dawn. We've got Richmond County, Turner County, and Cook County.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are just logging on, and welcome back to those of you who were here for our first session. Again, I'm Akia Lewis, the Strategic Innovation and Get Georgia Reading Project Manager at Georgia Family Connection Partnership. And we're so happy to have you here with us for our second session today, to hear from the illustrious Emily Rubin. This wouldn't be possible without our good partners and friends at the Deal Center, who are leaders in the state for early learning and literacy. I would like to introduce to you right now, Teresa McCreary-Lavelle, the Executive Director of the Sandra Dunnigan Deal Center for Early Language and Literacy at Georgia College, to say a few words.
Great. Thank you, Akia. Thank you, Akia. And good afternoon, everyone. And again, welcome back to those who were joining us for the first presentation, and welcome to those who are joining us for the next presentation. On behalf of the Deal Center team and in partnership with Get Georgia Reading, and we are excited to present to you this virtual professional learning series. We are a vehicle for the state of Georgia to bring evidence-based practices into organizations working with children and the families of Georgia, birth to age 8. And this virtual learning series is an example of how we are being that vehicle to bring to you experts in the field of early language and literacy. As Akia said, again, I am Teresa McCreary-Lavelle, and I am serving as the first executive director of the Deal Center. And we are located in the heart of Georgia, on Georgia College's campus, and with the statewide mission of improving literacy rates for children and families of Georgia. Just a little bit about the Deal Center. We are a research and training facility for the advancement of early language and literacy development. Our quest is to embed evidence-based practices in organizations working with children birth to age 8 with 3 main components: research and quality improvement, professional learning, and community engagement. I'm so excited to have Emily. Again, I can't even now count for me, probably on one hand, how many times I've heard this fantastic presentation, and every time I do hear it, I learn something new as well. We are about rooting our knowledge of the knowledge that we disseminate, rooted in science, for transformational change and sustainability. So you are in for a treat today. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it back over to Akia and get started with Emily's presentation. Enjoy.
Thank you, Teresa. Before Emily gets started, I want to toot her horn a little bit because I know she won't. Emily Rubin is a speech language pathologist specializing in social learning differences, and is the co-developer of Social Emotional Engagement Knowledge and Skills, SEEKS, which you'll hear more about today, which is a professional learning approach that teaches teachers and staff to engage students in learning. Emily is amazing. Every time I hear her present, I'm on the edge of my seat. So we're really excited to have her present to you today. Emily?
Thank you, Akia. And I always find it difficult to follow introductions like that, saying, I hope I don't let any of you down and that you won't be on the edge of your seats. Well, I'm on the edge of my seat, so hopefully that helps you a little bit. I also, before I wanted to get started, just wanted to introduce Jennifer Cardenas. She is on my SEEKS team as one of my educational outreach specialists, and she will be helping with Q&A. So she's watching the chat and will interrupt me if need be, if there's questions that are coming up. You also have Sarah Torian with Get Georgia Reading, as well as Akia moderating the chat. So So please feel free to share in who you are if you have questions, any ideas in that chat. I also plan to have some engagement opportunities for you within this portion of the webinar, and that may mean a breakout room. And not to worry, for those of you who are multitasking and doing many things at once, you are not required to participate in your breakout room. We will probably have at least 10 participants in each room, so hopefully you'll have some chance to discuss and engage with people who have joined into this meeting. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that before we get started. Let's see here. So here are the slides here, and I think that the challenge that I am faced with is a big one, because the title that I have given you is one that I wish I had all the answers for, and that is Re-engaging Georgia's Students and Teachers After a Crisis, the Neurochemistry of Hope. As Akia mentioned, I am the co-developer of Social Emotional Engagement Knowledge and Skills, otherwise referred to as SEEKS. SEEKS is a professional learning approach that provides all of us with freely accessible tools for measuring how connected children are with their parents, how connected they are with their teachers, and even how connected teachers are with one another. And so that's a tool that will help us to measure engagement. It's also a tool that helps us adjust instructional strategies to enhance engagement by providing that language-rich instruction that Gary and Ariane were alluding to in the previous webinar. And then finally, it's a tool to provide tools for teacher-to-teacher mentorship. This framework can also be used in early childhood settings as well as home and community settings. The approach is based on current neuroscience, which reminds us that positive and healthy social and emotional connections are literally the fuel that light up our brains and turn our brains on. This can activate us and provide us resilience when we need it the most. But this afternoon, I have the challenge, I think, to talk to us about this unprecedented challenge that we're facing here in Georgia's school systems, with Georgia's students and with Georgia's teachers. We have had a crisis, and that crisis is continuing to be happening to us. In today's sessions, I'm going to explain and discuss why students separated from their teachers and students separated from their peers, as well as teachers who are separated from their colleagues, provides a significant barrier to learning. And for many, this has actually created a traumatic event where emotional well-being is at risk. I'm also going to discuss how to measure the levels of connectedness of our students and staff and provide some tools for re-engaging one another, both in person instruction that might be socially distanced and also virtual instruction. And so I'm going to make sure you leave here with some ideas of what if we don't even go back in person and we've got, all this virtual learning going on, how do we re-engage? And so I want to make sure you know that's coming. So as you look at these images right here, when students are in their classrooms with their teachers and their peers, and they're making those connections, and teachers have each other to collaborate, to develop lesson plans together, to throw ideas off of one another, a number of neuroendorphins are released in the brain. One of these endorphins is called dopamine. And you don't have to be a child of the 70s like me to know what dopamine is. It's just dope. Dopamine gives you this feeling of craving, of wanting, of seeking out that connection. It lures us to pay attention to each other, to face challenges, and to sustain our effort in engaging with one another. It is the neurochemistry of what some people call hope. But practically speaking, the neurochemistry provides us with a sense of connection, of belonging, and resilience. This dope, if you will, it creates a craving feeling that sends us back for more interaction and more learning. It is that neurochemistry that fuels our brain. But what happens if the dope is not there? When a person experiences a situation where there's a sudden removal of dopamine or limited access to that dopamine, such as we experienced when we were in lockdown earlier in the spring, and we continue to experience in so many different ways, and will probably continue in many of our school districts across Georgia, that natural craving feeling of wanting to observe others, to learn from others, can diminish and decline. When the brain doesn't receive its dopamine, it doesn't crave social interaction anymore. A young person stops paying attention, stops listening, watching, observing, and even seeking out information. Simply put, this can halt learning and lead to disconnectedness, to feelings of isolation and exclusion. All of those, as we know, are known risk factors for mental health issues. And I want to shift into this image right here, because what happens if the dope is not here, not only for our students, but for our teachers? What if our teachers, if they're in brick and mortar instruction, are socially distanced from their peers, or if they're providing virtual instruction, a format that may be unfamiliar to them, they're isolated and disconnected from one another? This can lead to lower dopamine levels in our teachers' minds and brains, and therefore their resilience and ability to stay connected and engaged is going to be at risk. So in these situations, we need to find ways to continuously monitor the degree of connectedness of our learners, adjust instruction accordingly to create that feeling of safety, connection, and desirability. We need to be the dope for our students and for our peers and colleagues. This is going to fuel our reconnection and our sense of belonging. And while it's ideal that that happen in an actual in-person brick and mortar school, it can happen through remote learning if relationships between students and teachers are prioritized. And so in this session, I wanted to start with why. Why do we need to start this year by monitoring student engagement? There's no other higher priority. We need to make sure our students feel connected, a sense of belonging, and are getting that dope from us every day. And then I want to shift into what do we do to get that, especially if we have to do it through remote or virtual instruction. And finally, how do we support one another? How do we keep connected with one another so that we keep fueled and motivated for doing this? This, by the way, is one of those moments. And I'm seeing all of you logging on. We have more than 100 people now. I see that Telfair is here. We've got Rockdale County, Cook County Family Connection. Just by connecting with each other like this, it just makes me excited. I don't know about you, but I'm getting doped up. I see people from Greene County and I see people from Griffin-Risa. And it's exciting to see all you have joined together. We need to keep doing this because that's going to keep us engaged with one another and more resilient as we go back into challenging instruction. So why do we need to start by monitoring student engagement? Let's focus on this issue. Why do we need to do it and how do we do it? So first and foremost, our focus is often on critical outcomes like student attendance or participation. We want to make sure they're logging on to their virtual classes or showing up to school. We want them to have language skills. We want them to have literacy and academic milestones, but we need to understand what enables a child to be ready to learn those skills. Why is it that some children are compelled to actively engage, to look toward people, to find people interesting and predictable and desirable? It's that dopamine, I'm telling you. And let's take a step back into that neurodevelopment. And these are the slides that many of you have seen me present before, but I could geek out and talk about them all day long. I'm fascinated with brain development and how our brains work. And I can tell you first and foremost, our brains do not work well when we are not socially connected. Human brains are wired for social engagement. What turns our brains on is that social connection and engagement and back and forth serve and volley. And in fact, for our early childhood children, it is non-negotiable. It is what actually fuels brain development and leads, for example, to the development of language skills. Language skills lead to the development of self-regulation and executive functioning, which allow our children to be resilient in a range of different situations. The first phase of brain development couldn't be more important, and that is that every child on the planet needs to fall in love with the social world. Some of us refer to that as attachment. And in the brain, and the neurologists out there, they would say this is when our babies are learning that social stimuli is the most important stimuli to attend to pay attention to. And as you see with this young baby right here, she's looking toward her caregiver, lovingly looking toward those eyes, but she's also fisting her body, which means she can't get enough of this. This is almost overstimulating. It's exciting to her. Why is that happening? Well, when human babies are born, we're born with this reflex to look toward the eyes. We have these incredible black on white eye contrasts, and it's not at all a coincidence. In fact, most animal species that require caregiver-child bonding for survival and for learning have black on white eye contrast because they're eye-catching. The more contrastive the black on white eyes, the more intelligent the species. I find that fascinating. But the geneticists will tell us that if you look toward those animal species like humans that have this, there are certain chromosomes that say, ooh, you're looking toward social stimuli right now. I want to release a bunch of neuroendorphins in your brain. One of those being dopamine, which says crave this, want this, need this. So the more interaction a child has, the more dopamine they have, the more they're going to go back and forth and form those connections needed to fall in love with the social world. Dopamine is not the only neuroendorphin that is released. There's also something called opioids. Now, we hear a lot about the opioids out in the community, the kind that get us in trouble because of the addiction and the abuse. But there are some good opioids out there, no prescription necessary, free of charge. And how you get them is through positive, healthy social connections. And paired with your dopamine, you're craving this, and then it gives you that feel-good feeling of an opioid. That's the genetics doing their trick. But you can't just do it alone. You need that nurture. And when that caregiver is nurturing that mom, that little baby right there, what that caregiver is giving is another chemical, a chemical called oxytocin. One of my favorite hormones, by the way. It's a hormone, and it's actually a pheromone. And if those of you who are not familiar with the word pheromone, it is a hormone that travels through the air, and it serves as an attractant. It says, come here. So you're giving that oxytocin to this baby that's already doped up by you and has all this opioids. It's being lured into that connection. Oxytocin as a hormone is a really interesting one. It does something really kind of creepy. It breaks through the blood-brain barrier. So it goes from mommy into that baby and goes right into her brain, stirs on top of that dopamine and opioids, and creates something I refer to as an oxytocin mixed cocktail from heaven. You've got oxytocin, you've got dopamine, you've got opioids. This baby has no chance but to fall in love with the social world and do something quite interesting. And that is form the social brain. And that is actually grow that brain. Neurologists will tell you oxytocin actually turns into brain matter, kind of engineering. It actually forms your brain matter, and you need it to form that social brain. Why do we need a social brain? Because it tells us pay attention to people. They're amazing. Listen to them, imitate them, learn from them, and communicate with them. That's what needs to happen. But let me just skip back in time a little bit here. What if a child's born with a genetic vulnerability, such as many of the children I've worked with in the past, children with autism? They might have lower doses of dopamine, lower doses of opioids, just simply because their chromosomes are different. They're sending out different signals. Maybe they're just not that doped up by people or stimulated by people, so they have lower doses. But we can control the amount of oxytocin. We can just flood them with how amazing we are and get them hooked, even with that genetic difference. And so genetic does provide risk factors, but environment can really help and can really form that resilience. But we all know those children that seem to have the genetic ability to connect or genetic interest in people, but they didn't have the environment. And what do we need in that environment? That back and forth, serve and volley between caregiver, teacher, peer, and student and child. All of that forms to create that social brain. So children who have had adverse childhood experiences, who've had deprived environments and other risk factors, they're going to have vulnerabilities in developing the social brain. They may pay less attention to people or find people even a bit averse. But we've got to work together to make sure all human beings find people amazing, help them develop their social brain, because the next big phase of brain development is something that Gary and Ariane said is non-negotiable. It's when children learn to seek out social connections with language and words, and it forms the language hemispheres of the brain. Why do children talk? Why do they develop language skills? And that doesn't necessarily mean through speech. It could be through sign language or picture communication or other forms of symbolism. Why does that happen? Because they have something to say. They absolutely are captivated by people. They have high rates of communication and high interest in people. If a child has less interest in people and maybe forms the beginning of a social brain, the language regions may not fully develop, and you're going to see some subtle, if not significant, language delays. But when children get to this part of brain development, we need to make sure they're still seeking out connections with one another. The oxytocin cocktails need to fly. We need to see that back and forth. And I've seen so many kids get to this stage and talk and develop language, but not necessarily true reciprocal language. So they might say, I want yellow block, please, which is what this child is theoretically asking for. But we could also hear, Max play, Max build a tower, let's knock it down, and using people, verb, and noun sentence structures is using people's names and connections. True language development is going to occur when you have what speech pathologists call agent action or subject verb. And what do you need to do that? Relationships. And you need to be talking with people back and forth in order to create them. So in order to form your language hemispheres, you need to be immersed within an environment where people are talking about each other's names and verbs and connecting with each other to form the language hemispheres. Once you've got language, you're going to be able to start creating the regions of the brain that are involved with self-regulation, with executive functioning, to be able to succeed in a range of social situations, to learn how to be a student in a classroom or a student in a virtual classroom or a friend on the playground, a player on a sports team. All the rules change and they're constantly different. All of that leads to something called executive functioning. This is all occurring predominantly in the first 5 years of life, but brain development continues all the way through our early adulthood. In fact, we don't reach our full brain size until about 25 years of age. And so we've got plenty of time and plenty of opportunity to shape children and helping them form their social language and executive functioning brain. And it's critical for our children to get to that stage, stage in the context of a social and emotionally rich environment where we recognize as caregivers, as teachers and therapists and support, we are brain architects who are literally fueling the brain. We want to make sure that our children are socially craving, that they have the language skills they need and the resilience to self-manage. And so I want to go back to this slide and think about a tool that we have here in Georgia called the G-KIDS, which is assessing whether or not children are kindergarten ready by 5 years of age. And I always chuckle sometimes because I'll walk into a 5th grade classroom where I'll see 5th graders and I'll notice, goodness me, I don't think that child over there is kindergarten ready. Because what are we assessing when we look at that particular set of social emotional skills? Is we're assessing the child's interest in people, their language skills, and their executive functioning. What would truly be a child who's ready for kindergarten is a child who's actually resilient, who can delay gratification, has strong self-regulation skills, and the ability to cope. All of that coming from strong relationships and language skills. To be able to share remorse with others, to explain oneself, you need language skills to do that. To be able to delay gratification, you need language skills. And indeed, some children are. I was just noticing from the comments that executive functioning is often missing in some children. So let me tell us a quick story about that. Imagine a 5-year-old going off for his first day of school here in Georgia. He's got an Atlanta United t-shirt on. He's ready to go. He's been reading since day one of his life. He's had a strong home environment, strong genetics, good interpersonal. He went to a quality rated early childhood program. And so by the time he gets to kindergarten, he is so ready. And he's been reading about how great this kindergarten teacher is going to be and how he's going to meet friends that love soccer as much as he does. So he shows up to school with a big smile on his face. He loves people. He runs into the classroom and the teacher from across the hallway wasn't greeting him at the door, hadn't gotten that memo yet from the principal, and sees a child running into the classroom. After 5 years of waiting to meet his first kindergarten teacher, what's the thing that he first hears? He's scolded. He's actually scolded. As a young man, we don't run in the classroom. So he immediately stops, looks toward his teacher, and sees her and smiles because people make him smile. He's so addicted to oxytocin cocktails and feels remorse and explains himself. He doesn't actually get upset by the scolding. He says, I'm sorry. He says, but I see a boy wearing an Atlanta United shirt across the room and I was excited. He could express his emotion and use subject, verb, noun, sentence structure to explain himself. The boy's wearing the Atlanta United shirt. And she says, oh, that's Joshua. You may talk to Joshua after you do your work. I need you to sit down and do this worksheet. I want you to write your name 5 times on this piece of paper to assess your handwriting. Please don't get me started on how disengaging that activity is. But he looks at it and he's like, whoa, I didn't read about this in my kindergarten books. I didn't know we were going to do something so boring. But he explains himself once more time. May I speak with Joshua? And she goes, first, James, write your name 5 times, then you can talk to Joshua. So he sits down and he goes, oh, James, write his name 5 times, then Joshua. He writes it with perfect handwriting. He's been practicing quite some time, hands it to her, and walks nicely off to talk to Joshua. Throw your hands in the air. What just happened? Because that's crazy. That 5-year-old just came into a classroom, broke the rules, but when he was corrected for that, showed remorse, explained himself with his language skills, and then used delayed gratification to delay his desire to talk to this peer by learning a new and relatively arbitrary rule that you have to write your name 5 times to go talk to a peer. And he did that because he had developed the beginning of what we call executive functioning. You need social motivation and you need language. If either of those are vulnerable, your executive function is going to be the first thing to go. And so you're going to see children making poor choices and not being able to delay gratification. So what we've seen and have heard about so far in this session is the importance of social connections and relationships and how important that is to actually fuel the neurochemistry of the brain, to pay attention to people so that they can develop language skills and ultimately executive functioning skills. So I'd love for you to talk because when you talk and share and when you go into your breakout rooms, I encourage you, if you're feeling comfortable, to open up your video camera so people can see you, because when people see you, they're going to get totally doped up by you. And sharing. And so there's about 115 of you in this session. So I'm going to put you into about 15 rooms of about 10 in a room. If you've never done this before, you should get an invite that pops up and says you want to join your breakout room. And you just click there. You'll be in there for about 5 or 6 minutes. And I want you to talk with each other. What signals your children show you to let you know that they are engaged? So let me go ahead and assign your breakout rooms right here. Right now. And looks like we are all coming back in. That is fabulous. All right. And so my hope right now is that you all experienced a breakout room and had a chance to share what does positive engagement look like with your students. And rather than call on all of you, because there was about 15 of your rooms, if any of you wants to share out and can raise your hand, you're welcome to, or unmute yourself and share out. What did you talk about in your groups? Go.
Hi, I'm Tara. There
Hey,
were
Tara.
five of us in our group, and two of them were educators. So they talked about in response to the questions, which I need to pull up so I can remember what they were. In response to the questions, just how engagement was measured by how the information is relayed to the children, but then also their level of response. Are they asking questions? Are they interacting? Are they making statements? Are they paying attention? Those are some of the ways. Are they making eye contact? Those are some of the ways to gauge their engagement, their level of investment in the class. If someone who was in my group, please feel free to continue the conversation. That's all I can remember.
Oh, thank you so much. What was your name again?
Tara.
Kara, thank you so much for sharing out. And what I heard your group talking about was, hey, you noticed that you've got to see, is this child paying attention, making eye contact, asking questions, participating? So you kind of list off all these different things that you see your students doing, and that is your gauge that they're connected or engaged with you. Did any other group want to share out? And all of you are welcome to send your thoughts in via chat, and so we can read those as well. So. And I see Christy Mitchell mentioned when students are not engaged, we look for eye contact, participation, smiles, head nods to ensure they're interacting. And virtually, we would like to have cameras on so that you can actually see them and so that you can see their facial expressions and connections that way.
Hi, Emily. This is Cheryl from the Deal Center.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. We talked about those kids that have to move. And even though they're moving, they are still invested. You know, they look like they are not engaged, but when in fact they actually are. So when you check in on them, they are able to follow along, answer questions, and give and return in terms of the information that's being discussed. So we found that to be interesting. A couple of my group members talked about their kids being those active listeners.
Yeah.
They had to do in order to engage.
Well, thanks, Cheryl, because when we talk a little bit about how we measure engagement, sometimes we can have kids who look like messy engaged. They're definitely engaged, they're invested, they're excited, they just don't sit still. It doesn't mean they're not engaged. In fact, the more moving that you see out of them, it might actually be a signal of their engagement. I'm seeing some comments from Renee Perry. That group spoke about the importance of allowing students the opportunity to communicate, to answer, not just be lectured to. Great to engage students by getting on their level, making eye contact, smiles, and lots of active listening. So you want to make sure that you're seeing that and you have those opportunities for it as well. So what I'd like to do, if you didn't get a chance to share, please throw it into the chat box so everybody can read it while I'm talking. But one thing I wanted to do right now was to send you off a poll. That way I can find out, just statistically speaking, of the 15 groups that we had just now, what did you all talk about? So I'm going to launch this poll. The question is going to be, what indicators of engagement did your breakout room spend the most time on? But this is giving me a sense of what you all talked about. About 66 of you have now responded, and about a third of you spent a lot of time talking about students showing shared interest in the activity. And then quite a bit of you also said, but we also want to see them completing their activity on their own and sharing their ideas with their peers as well. These polls are interesting and important to do as part of any virtual learning to make sure that I'm hearing from all of you. Okay. So what we talked about essentially in your breakout rooms was that active engagement is complex to measure because we want to look at how invested they are. That is one of our eyes of investment or of engagement. But we also want to see how independent they are. Are they able to actually complete the work and access the tools they need to problem solve and get their tasks accomplished? And finally, do they have a chance to show what they know and communicate to their peer? To see truly engaged kids, kids where their whole brain is lit up with that oxytocin cocktail, we want to see investment, independence, and initiation. And those are the topics that you probably talked about in your breakout rooms. So we need a tool that is freely accessible and that can measure this connectedness. And this is a tool that will be in your resources that are coming in your handout, but also on the SEEKS.com website for all of you to access. And this particular tool just measures on a scale of 0 to 4. Are my students actively engaged? If they were 4, they're fully engaged. They don't want to be anywhere else than in that lesson with you. Mostly engaged kids enjoyed it. They were participating. They were invested, independent, and initiating. The partially engaged kids are the kids who do as they're told. They follow instructions and complete the work when you prompt them and give them support, but they're not as much likely to initiate and show that degree of investment. And then there's the zero focus and then emerging fleeting kids, kids who are not showing much initiation, who are unpredictable as to whether they'll participate and respond, and not showing a lot of positive emotion. Or for the no focus kids, are not even logged on to the meeting entirely. You can use this tool both in brick and mortar in-person instruction or in a Google Hangout classroom meeting. I could be gauging you, and I might need some help depending on the number of people. It's hard with 100 and something of you, but I would be tracking how much you're participating in the chat. If I see your video, are you smiling and leaning in? I would be gauging, are you with 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4? And this particular, this helps us know when students are fueled for learning. When Ariane and Gary were speaking in their previous webinar, they talked about language as a missing link. We used the social engagement ladder to quickly identify kids that might be at risk for having language difficulties or other social emotional challenges. Kids that end up at the 0 and 1, especially if they stand out from a whole bunch of kids who are 2, 3s, and 4s down at the bottom of the ladder. Those are kids that we might then do additional screening and additional support for, find out why that's happening, and then adjust our instruction accordingly to really find those opportunities and rise them up. All right, and so I'm going to show you a little bit about how to score that, just to give you a quick example, and also to brighten up your afternoon with this adorable video. This is a Head Start program in Columbus, Georgia. And the teacher here was a former special education parapro who's turned into a Head Start early childhood program teacher, and they are so lucky to have her. She just knows all about student engagement, how to keep children busy, how to keep them invested, independent, and initiating. And so what I'd like you to do is watch a little bit of this video and see, do you see those indicators of engagement? And then I'll break it down for you to show you how I might actually score this on the engagement ladder.
So that he can see a caterpillar eats on leaves, eats on leaves, eats on leaves. A caterpillar eats on leaves to get some energy. A caterpillar rests in a pupa, rests in a pupa, rests in a pupa. A caterpillar rests in a pupa and becomes a butterfly. You gotta turn your sock inside out and show me your butterfly, because that is the life cycle of the butterfly. My butterfly has beautiful colors because they're very beautiful.
You got green.
You got green in your butterfly? Do the sock right. Thank you. This is how you do it. You did a good job. Now you gotta show your butterfly.
Okay, and what you hear in terms of engagement is a loud classroom, and loud classrooms are also classrooms that are going to score high on the engagement level ladder. You see lots of chatter, lots of on-topic chatter. So how do we break that down and score it? And so you see those two girls right here, these ones here. I'm going to go ahead and annotate this so you can see what I'm pointing to. So you see these girls over here. You got direct face-to-face smiling. Has this learner been hooked, and is that attention sustained? That's how we judge whether we have investment. And in these two girls, if you watch the video back, you will notice they never lose their investment. They're there the entire time. These are kids who I would score at the highest level on the engagement ladder, because they are literally forgetting they want to be anywhere else than in that lesson. Then you go over here and you've got joyful children over here as well. We've got excitement, engagement, and smiles. Very nice. And so I'm going to show you now the next examples. How do we know that they're independent? Is the learner using tools such as role models, hands-on materials, and visuals to follow expectations? And I noticed that the modeling of expectations in this classroom seemed to appear to foster independence. You see this little boy right next to his teacher. And by the way, he's not just there by happenstance. You know that that teacher put that boy there on purpose because he really needs that extra role modeling and hands-on and visuals to help him know to support his independence. So as a result, we saw some independence from that young man. Next we see is the learner communicating and showing us what they know. So not only do we have the emotional investment, the hook, we see them actually participating in lessons independently, but we also want to see them chatting and talking. And we notice that the seating arrangements with them all sitting in a circle so they can see each other, but close proximity to their peers enabled them to actually show what they know about their butterflies and talk about that. So we see some initiation. That helps us know when our students are fueled, but it also helps us look for the kids where there are opportunities to increase in any of those areas. So I would point over to this child over to the far right. He appeared to be invested because he remained with the group the whole time, and he appeared to show some independence by imitating most or some of the actions. But there may be an opportunity to increase his independence and or his initiation. This teacher noticed it because she kept coming over and giving him extra role models and extra support to support his independence. So that classroom had that extra adult proximity to help. But that said, I still see him as being very invested enough to participate, to follow directions and be there. He's more of a 2 on the engagement ladder, not a 0 or a 1, because he was following instructions and doing as told. Now this child always gets me smiling. He was highly invested and he showed his independence by participating in each of the actions. There was one occasion when he actually put his thumb in the air that you'll see in the bottom left right here to say, I like this activity, but he had to look out of the corner of his eye to his teacher. Aside from looking toward the camera person, he actually rarely looked toward his teacher or his peers. It was something that you would notice if you were looking very carefully. And then at the end, he couldn't figure out how to turn his sock inside out, so he starts smacking it on the floor, right? The teacher, who's sitting very close to him, responds to his intent, not the behavior, and says, it appears you need help. And she says, Miss Ivy, help please, and models subject, verb, noun, and modeling how to actually say that sentence. This is a child who was later identified as having language delays. And so you have this child who's not quite there, but he's invested, he's interested, but he needed more help. And Miss Ivy just knew that. She did not have the attribution error, seeing him being misbehaved by starting to kind of bang on the floor and all that. She knew immediately he must not be able to communicate his intent to me. And so there's an opportunity. So how do we score all of that? It's not easy to score it in a 5-minute clip or a 3-minute clip like this. But what we do is we judge how many of our students were 4s on that engagement ladder. And that's what you see. There's about 3 of them, 2 of the girls that I pointed out and the boy to their left. They forgot they wanted to be anywhere else than in that lesson. They're fully engaged. Then there was about 5 kids who were mostly engaged. They were happy, they were initiating, independent, and invested. And about 4 kids who were 2s on the engagement ladder, meaning they did everything they were told to do, and when they didn't do it and they were given extra prompts, they did it then. They were very cooperative. They needed a little more kind of support and guidance to be independent and initiating. So we have a little balance. We score that, those 3 times 4, we do a little mathematics here, and we get an average of 2.67. This lesson is bringing the fuel for learning. There's something working in this lesson because all kinds of kids with all kinds of different learning abilities were successful. Anything above a 2.5 or above on your engagement ladder is likely showing a positive learning climate that's really fueling active engagement. If we had seen a child down here by 0s and 1s, those are the kids that I might want to say, have we thought about a language screening? Not necessarily to climb them right up to the, to a speech and language therapist or something like that, but to see if we can work with Miss Ivy to bring more language supports into this universal instruction that's being provided. So I wanted you to have this activity to kind of think about how we score the engagement. This will be recorded so that you can look and access this again in the future and show it to your colleagues. And maybe you can rewind and watch that video again so that you can actually have more time to be thinking about it. So what happens if you see this pattern? There are opportunities here. What can we do slightly differently to get our, this is a different pattern. What if we see this pattern where we have 5 3s, 4 2s, and 3 1s? Whoa, we have a different pattern here. What can we do to adjust our instruction to get our 1s up to a 2? How do we bring more investment? How do we bring more independence? And how do we bring more communication opportunities? So it's a key question right here. So let's consider then, why is it happening? How do we get our kids above a 2 on the engagement ladder? And this is a really, really critical concept. And I'm reading a very important comment that I want to share out to the large group as we think about it. This is a lovely small group. There is about 12 children in this group. It's hard to see them all in the video. Most of the Head Start classrooms have about 18 kids in each classroom, but 2 teachers. It's sort of the Head Start ratio. But we have to figure out ways. What if we have 20 to 25 kids? How do we do that? How do we break them into smaller groups? How do we get that high engagement? And that may be one of the things we think about, is how do we break our bigger classes into smaller classes? With virtual learning, which I'm going to be shifting to very shortly, we're going to talk a little bit about how to bring that engagement into that environment as well. One of the key, I don't want to say opportunities, is for teachers to recognize that they can break their classes into Group A, Group B, and Group C. Smaller classes on virtual learning, higher engagement. If we try to go after 25 at a time, it might be more challenging. Or if you're teaching at a secondary level, like middle school, high school, and different content, you teach an asynchronous lesson, meaning you record your lesson, they watch it for homework, and then you log on with them to do practice opportunities in smaller groups. So you're not repeating yourself over and over and over again. So there's lots of different ways to do that. So let me show you, I'm going to put you back into your groups though. This time I want you to really reflect on, what do you do to get your students above a 2 on the engagement ladder? Even if you're not teachers and you go into classrooms or you're aware of this, I want to make sure that you've thought about this. How do I get my kids invested? And when my students are independent, what did I do to get them to be independent? And if my students are chatting and initiating or showing what they know through their nonverbals and facial expressions or picture communication, what have I done to support their initiation? So I'm going to go ahead and break you into the breakout rooms again. There we go. All right, so we've just had our second and final breakout room, and I wanted to see if any of you wanted to share out. What did you do? What do you do to enhance engagement in your students? What gets them above a 2? Anyone want to share out?
Our group talked a lot about music, dance, and multisensory. We also realize that we all are teaching different age groups and have different disciplines that we're focusing on in the classroom. So one of the things that came up for one of our members was being mobile, and how do you do music and mobility with your materials?
Being mobile, I'm sorry, repeat that last part. So you're saying being mobile, and how do you?
Being mobile with your manipulatives that you might need to go from class to class, from K to 5.
All right, there you go. And Caroline, you're logging on from Arizona, aren't you?
That is correct.
Okay.
Arizona 3 to 5-year-old inclusion public school.
Oh, very nice. I'm so glad you can join us and you can share some of that with us. I appreciate that. Share out. Some of you have shared out that humor and breaking into song and dance. That's the theme right here. Music, dance, and movement. I should have done the Savage dance, Jennifer. But I will go ahead and poll you on this and see what comes up of it. And it basically, what enhances student engagement? Again, there's an all of the above option, but if you find one of them to be the most important, you go ahead and respond. I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. Hopefully it pops up on your screen or your phone, and let's see how we go with that. And so I'm looking at the results, you're not, but you're debating about the responses. And right now the strongest lead is all of the above. We need to get the hook with students' interests. We also need to provide routines, clear expectations, hands-on and visuals, and then give opportunities to share out and work with peers. The strong lead is that actually we need to do all of that in order to really foster active engagement in our classrooms. And many of these things you're already doing in your in-person instruction. Now we have faced, many of us, with the challenge of how do we do that when we're going to virtual learning? So that's something I'm going to share. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share those results with you. So hopefully you are seeing the polling results. I know if you're on a phone, you have to kind of play around with what display it's showing. But right now you'll see a strong response, 33 out of the I think it was about 65 of you that responded, said all of the above, but of course, getting the hook with students' interest was then in second place. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now is go back to sharing my screen with you here, and let's talk about what this all means. is that basically what we've just shared is that if we want to get active engagement in our students and even with our teachers, with ourselves, we need to get the emotional regions of the brain involved by stimulating the interest and motivation for learning, getting the hook. And that literally turns on the amygdala, gets all of those beautiful dopamine activators going, get that part of the brain fired up. But we also need to get the back of the brain engaged, which means we need to provide information in different ways through visuals, routines, hands-on manipulatives, as Caroline was sharing. The more that child gets to experience and have shared understanding, children with language delays may not have ever heard that word before. So if they're seeing it, seeing a visual, holding an object, acting it out while they're hearing the language, that representation is going to equal greater independence with being able to problem solve on their own. So the back of the brain, we need to fill that up with multiple modes of representation. And then finally, let's get the frontal lobes in there and making sure all of our learners have a chance to act and most importantly, communicate and share what they know with other students and with their teachers. And so what the social emotional engagement knowledge and skills does is it provides you with a quick reference tool that is matched to a child's language level. So what Gary and Ariane shared with us before is not all children are fully conversational, have full command of language and ultimately executive functioning. Some are at that emerging language. They have vulnerabilities with their ability to put subject, verb, noun, sentence structures together. So they may need a little additional support. And then there are children out there, of course, that are not yet talking. They're not yet using signs, pictures, or even speech. So in your handout reference, as well as on the SEEKS website, we have a freely accessible tool called the Quick Reference Tool, which is how do we use SEEKS to adjust our instructional practices by language level. This is designed for really the tier 1 instructional level. So if you have a child in your classroom that is at the emerging language, have you thought about what's in that middle column to get the emotional hook, to foster investment, to support independence, and then if on the back side of that page, to support initiation. So you're going to see recommendations, for example, as I just quickly get my little arrow up here, you're going to see recommendations for emerging language level. We might need to provide duplicate sets of visual supports for lessons to reference during group instruction. So if we're singing the ABC song up here, maybe we have a visual in all of their laps that says the ABC song. That's going to look very similar in a virtual learning. We might actually need to have visuals in front of them, in front of that computer. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. So this is a tool that's like your homework, to read it, to look through it, but also mostly affirm your practices. You know these things are important. They're there to affirm what you already do, but also there when you see opportunities like 0, 1s, and 2s on the engagement ladder, you want to increase investment, you go back to that page and you look for, ooh, if this is where I have a student in my class at this level, I need to make sure all of these things are in place for that student. So what instructional strategies enhance engagement? And I'm just going to show you first one example in in-person instruction. I'm going to show you a pre and a post, and maybe if I have time, I'll show you another. And then I'm going to show you a new tool for virtual learning that kind of goes along with that same concept. I'm going to show you a teacher who struggled in an integrated preschool classroom. She had about 15, 20 kids in her classroom at any given time. Many of them were typically developing, actively engaged kids for the most part, but she also had children with special education needs, and the child that happens to be sitting on her lap is a child with language delays. And so what she did was follow the recommendations of the special educators on her team and actually provided him with proximal visual supports so that he could be successful in that classroom. But then her question came back to me was, I feel like I'm losing the rest of my class and they're not as actively engaged. So she came to me with this particular video around the 12 days of winter. It was a counting book. And I'm just going to show you a brief clip, and then I'll show you how we would reaffirm her. This is what I noticed it was happening to foster engagement. Where are there opportunities? Where do you want to go? So let's watch the 12 days of winter.
What is birdseed? Carly, do you know? What's birdseed?
It looks like
Oh, Miss Lyra's going to show you.
Landon has this picture. Does anybody have this picture?
No.
Oh,
Say, I do.
I don't.
Zally, you have the birdseed.
Zally. It's Zally's turn.
Under number 5 for the
Zally's
fifth day of
coming up.
winter.
Birdseed.
Good job, Zally. Seventh day of winter, my best friend gave to me
Right here.
7 maple leaves.
Maple
Who has a picture of leaves?
I do.
Maple leaves.
Look, it's Bennett.
Come up, it's your turn, Bennett. Go around the floor,
Here,
Landon.
let's sit right here. Can we sit right here? So Bennett, look, Bennett's coming. Bennett's
Bennett's
coming.
turn. Bennett, can you find number 7?
It's Bennett's turn. Bennett's turn. Good job. Let's find Bennett's picture. Look, it's Bennett's turn.
So what we notice in this video is a very hardworking teacher and a speech and language therapist also reading the story at the front of the room. And you see with this youngster that has language delays, what some might characterize as behavior challenges. He's arching his back, he's screeching, he's interrupting. But what just happened was he was enjoying being on the comfort of his teacher's lap, and Bennett just came rolling right through because it was Bennett's turn. But he doesn't understand the language, Bennett. He doesn't understand his turn, what that means. What does a turn mean? And so he was confused and a bit exacerbated. So what we did through our mentorship is first and foremost, let this teacher know we appreciated and admired what she was already doing to foster investment, independence, and initiation. We noticed that each child had a special role in that group, and that appeared to foster their investment. They all remained seated on the rug. They were all there because each of them had a part of that snowman that they were going to put on the front board to create a snowman that they were going to have in their own classroom. The story was paired with graphics and real life connection, and that appeared to foster their independence. So the special role was all about their investment. Now they've got these hands-on materials. They're going to go make a snowman on the front board. That allowed them to be more independent. And then the students had an opportunity to share out and show what they know with pictures, and that seemed to foster their initiation. If we were to do an engagement ladder, the teacher, though, said there's a number of opportunities. There's a couple of kids that are like emerging fleeting or partially engaged that I want them to be mostly engaged. I want more. I want to see them each have an opportunity to initiate and communicate and understand. So we helped her. She specifically said, I want to focus on investment. And we said, well, you have emerging language kids in that classroom. So let's look at where the arrow is pointing here. And it says, if you want to foster investment, you might want to have a purposeful application. So if you're reading a story, you have the students act out or role play the meaning of that word right in front of them so that they're all very invested in what they're doing. And I think also if we were to scroll down, you would see visual supports and other contextual information. So the next time she got them together for a book, actually this is about 2 months later, she's got them going with Pete the Cat and his 4 groovy buttons. And if you love music, this is going to get stuck in your head right now forevermore. And what she did was make sure that each and every one of the students in her classroom had something that they can act out and role play with. She changed the seating arrangement so she could see every single one of them. She, of course, kept her little guy with language delays right next to her. But she made sure this time that the supports were not just for him, they were for the entire class. So everyone's got a little plate in front of him and they all have little pretend buttons. And when every time Pete loses a button, they have to take a button off their plate. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see increased investment, independence, and initiation in all of her kiddos, not just the kid with emerging language level that is in her classroom.
My buttons, my 3 groovy buttons, my buttons. Oh no!
Take one away.
Another button popped up and
rolled
away.
Or you guys can cry.
Left.
2.
3 minus 1 equals 2. Did
Pete cry? Goodness no.
Buttons
Come and buttons go.
He
Kept on singing. Ready? We have 2.
My buttons, my 2 groovy buttons. Oh no!
Oh no!
Another
Button popped off.
My favorite button.
You left
Buttons
are left. How many are left?
2
1.
minus 1 equals 1.
There it is.
Did
He cried? Goodness no.
buttons
Come and buttons go. Take it off.
And so as you see in this video, same group of kids, by the way, it's this teacher, she said, I need to reconsider this whole environment. And it was, again, the struggle of that one child with language. I need to always have visuals for him, but why don't I just design my whole lesson plan so each of my students has visuals to work with so we can kind of go from there. Now, SEEKS will move all the way up to different developmental levels. We are running this in high school programs across the state. One of my favorite teams I'm working with is a high school algebra core team where we have the 4 math teachers brainstorming how to increase investment, independence, and initiation. This particular example is showing a group of kids who are working on a literacy target of understanding metaphors and idioms. And how they do that is to make sure that we embedded the activity in something meaningful, competitive, humorous. So they had to get themselves out of an escape room and they got to work with peers in order to do that. So we give them visual supports for what to say, when to talk, and how to engage with one another, and tools and a visual to remind them what they're going to need, the items needed, their voice level, and their to-do list. You put all those visual supports together and you let them go, and you just see the engagement.
Right there. Yes, D is 1. D, no, D, sorry, yeah, D. Dog. And I believe D is 1. Okay, and then below D, you're gonna write great.
And what you see is kids working together to actively problem solve. I'm just going to skip ahead so you see these two boys right here. They are working hard to figure out the meaning of these two phrases. And because they have each other, they can combine their shared experiences and understanding so much better than if they were trying to tackle this on their own.
To work hard. Where's that though? To hope something bad happens, to hope something good happens. To hope something good happens. Yeah. So no, it's B. It's B because to have good luck. Better than that, it means like good luck. Yes. So it's B. So what is B going to be? Oh wait. B. Circle B.
I don't know if you heard what they were talking about, but they were trying to break down the expression break a leg, and whether or not break a leg was a good thing or a bad thing. And they said it's actually good luck. They were trying to work it all together, but they had the visual supports, the peer interaction, the visuals, and that enabled them to stick with this task and go with it. Now that probably made you feel a bit sad, because that in-person instruction is one of the most critical things we need to get that dopamine flying and to give our kids resilience. So I wanted to end off today by making sure that you have a tool for what instructional strategies might enhance engagement during virtual instruction. And I grabbed this image right here because you see the child's like smiling into the camera, holding up an actual drawing that she's made, or her work and so forth, having manipulatives at her desk to show to her teacher. Just because we're online doesn't mean we have to do all learning through keyboarding. We still can draw, we still can sculpt, we can still create, we can still make messes. We can do all of those things, and we can also share. That's a really key part of this. So I'm giving you a tool in your handout packet, which hopefully IKEA and others have shared with you. Otherwise, at the very end, I will have a link for you to go to be able to download this. This is a new tool that we created. It's called Supporting Student Engagement in the Remote Learning Environment, and it's specifically using our SEEKS framework. And what you'll see here is if you're going to try to secure investment in a virtual lesson, you need to get the hook. If you want independence, they need access to toolkits, visual manipulatives, hands-on materials, which might mean that we need to have them go on a little scavenger hunts at their homes to get things that they can use for their math and reading and writing lessons. Or we might need to actually courier those items to them so they have materials there for learning at home. And then finally, to secure initiation, students need options to participate, whether we use polling or chatting or just, written emails, whatever, any way to get kids to communicate. So if we go over here to investment, I want you to just read through these and to think about how that might apply to a virtual learning environment with your population. Some basic ones: is the teacher's video active? Can they see your face? Do students have an option to share their video? And have students been greeted by name? Have we called out each other, made connections? Are real life activities or examples included? And is it presented in a way that's relevant to student experience? Are there choices being offered? Are there hands-on materials? And are we working on tools to help them stay actively engaged and persist? So some of you mentioned music, dance, I believe. And so we want to have schedules been included so they know what to expect, but have we also built in movement breaks and music as well as a really key things? And have we provided check-ins at the end of the lesson to make sure students enjoyed themselves? And I'm going to show you those in just a moment. Are there opportunities to foster independence by pairing individual hands-on materials with virtual instruction delivery? And I'm working with one district right now where they're literally creating their kindergarten math manipulatives into little bags that they're going to courier out or have parents pick up, so that students, when they log on remotely, they are not just logging on with the computer, but they can actually use the base 10 blocks and some of the materials that they might need to be successful. Also, those of you who are, those working with the positive behavioral support modality, you're going to see virtual learning expectations. How do we present those in different ways? Have social expectations for online participation been defined and reviewed? Do they know when to mute, when not to, how to share video, how to take breaks? Are students affirmed for their participation, and so forth? So if you read through this, you're going to see lots of opportunities for investment and independence. And then we're going to make sure that students are paired into dyads or small work groups and figured out ways to share and communicate. There are many apps out there, particularly for children, to share and collaborate, like on virtual whiteboards, Kahoot, Flipgrid, all that great stuff. But we're going to figure out different ways to do that. I wanted to share with you some of the tools that are referred to at the bottom of this page. One of them is the student engagement check-in. So is there a check-in that we can do after we give a virtual lesson? How do we know that the students were engaged? So you click on that link, it'll take you to a sample Google survey that you're welcome to then recreate as your own Google survey for your classroom or for your staff, even if you're doing this in staff meetings. How interested were you in this lesson? If you were a 4, I didn't want the lesson to end. If it's a 3, I kept my attention most of the time. A 2, it was kind of interesting, but I had work to pay attention. A 1 is a little interested, but I wasn't paying much attention, and a 0 was not interesting at all. The other check-ins might be about independence, like how do you feel about mastering the learning target here? A 4 would be you're an expert, you could probably teach it to one of your peers, versus a 0, I don't understand it at all. And then another one about communication. Did you have lots of different ways and opportunities to share during this lesson? And then finally go way down to 1, there were not, or 0. There were not many ways at all to communicate or share. So these little check-ins are things that I think we could do for children at the beginning, at the emerging language and conversational, for children who are nonverbal or before words. Either you're doing this with parent observation because parents are there to engage, to give you that particular check-in. There's also a student well-being check-in, just a sample. These are just there to give your minds food for thought about virtual check-ins. This is a self-regulation survey, and it's actually given credit to Jessie Moon at Social Circle Elementary School, who said we could share it with others. They use the zones of regulation for self-regulation in their district, and once a week, even during the spring quarantine, they would send home this survey to their students, and they would ask them, how are you? Where are you in this zone? What zone are you in? And why are you there? Who were you with? Do you feel safe? What strategy might help you get back into the green? And what would you like to talk to a teacher or another adult? These check-ins are potentially a way to make sure that our students still see us as not just teachers, but as emotional support to get through both their days and academically, but also just their lives in general. So I wanted to be sure that you had that as well. And so that particular tool is your resource to share. I've had some districts I've worked with, they've turned it into a Google Doc and they're adding their own ideas and resources and supports. It's meant not to be a whole nother program that teachers need to do when they're doing virtual learning. It's really just a checklist. Have I done these things to get student investment, independence, and initiation? And if not, where are my opportunities? Which one do I want to try on my next meeting? So as I conclude right here, the last thing I want to conclude with is the how. Mentorship should be consistent with engaging adult learning practices. We have to recognize that our educators are the fuel for healthy brain development, and are we fueling one another? And that when SEEKS gets implemented within a school system, myself, Jennifer Cardenas, and other team members, as well as program specialists, say at the CSRA RESA, who have learned about SEEKS, they can help you implement SEEKS. We focus a lot on this part. How do we mentor each other? We want to make sure that teachers stay invested, they're independent, they're initiating, and they feel uplifted by this and just re-energized. And so we do that by going in and noticing what they're already doing to fuel investment, independence, and initiation with our mentorship tools, and then asking them where they see opportunities. If they see opportunities, we simply say, do you have a sense of where you want to go after having looked at this tool, or do you want to collaborate? So it's a real peer mentorship, it's non-evaluative, and it's a sense of just rejuvenating. I've had a number of schools cancel and say we don't want to do professional learning for our teachers this year because we're going through so much stress and so much quarantine. But I feel that SEEKS is a bit different. It's a bit more like group therapy. It's more like, how do we re-energize our oxytocin cocktails? Let's get together. Let's crash our Google. I would have one teacher crash another teacher's Google Hangout and sit back and go, I noticed that when you used that humor, or when you had that dance break, or when you called out that student by name, that seemed to fuel his investment. Do you see opportunities? And let's go back to our remote learning guidelines and collaborate together so we still have each other. Because if we don't have each other and we don't have relationships, we might lose our resilience. We won't have the dope, and we need to be the dope for each other. So let's do this whether we are together in person or we are apart from one another. And as I end off here, this is a story from Gilmer County, Georgia. Appreciative inquiry makes my life easier rather than harder. It's about getting teachers to support one another. And so this afternoon, hopefully I've shared with you that engagement is a gauge of our well-being for all learners, including our teachers. And so as a result of what's going on with our quarantine and with COVID-19, I do hope we are measuring how connected our students are, and we are supporting one another to enhance engagement both in person and virtually. Some of you are eager to know, do I have access to these tools? I'll leave this up there. You can take a picture with your phone or screenshot it. It'll also be in your chat and sent via email. These are various links to get these various tools available to you, and you're welcome to share. So I'm going to pass it back over to Akia. You have all of 5 minutes for my Q&A.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was awesome. You lived up to the hype. So imagine that I am a teacher in my upcoming virtual school year that starts in August. I have no prior relationship with the students. What advice or tips would you give me to create the hook and start building that relationship from day one?
What a good question. I mean, and it's, again, that first thing is I think about is stimulating that individual student's interest, but in that whole group is maybe possibly finding a way to send a survey out to the families of those students or to the students themselves, depending on their age. That's sort of an interest survey. And what floats your boat? What are you interested in? And that way, when you're first logging on, you have like a video to show of that Star Wars movie or of that thing. And so you are immediately greeting them with this recognition of, I care about you, and I'm going to be here to connect with you throughout the year. So kind of knowing about your students before you even log on with them is one of the key strategies, so that they log on and immediately it's their favorite dance song, or it's their, it's this image from that YouTube star they like, or whatever it is. You might have to watch a little TikTok to get to know if you are working with secondary kids. I'm sorry. You got to learn to do the dance, so.
Yeah. And the next question and final question, in the interest of time, this is from the perspective of parents and community, because I know not everybody on the call is a teacher. What advice would you give us to foster this engagement when we might be working from home while our kids are in virtual schools? As parents, we might not, we're trying to balance a lot of different things at one time, or we may be a community partner who is not an educator.
I think that balancing work life, what I hear you saying is, how might we increase our independence with self-regulating ourselves? So I'm always thinking, it's like, how do I cope? Like I might find it interesting, I might be engaged, but at the same time I can't cope. And so in that virtual learning tool I shared with you earlier, there'll be some sample schedules in there, come from the Khan Learning Academy, that I think it's important to schedule the day. And if you're working from home, yet supporting your younger children to log on in the morning, I might make sure that I can, with my work setting, shift my hours to the afternoon a little bit and say I'm actually available from 1 o'clock onward, and I do work later into 6 o'clock hour, because I got to be on with my little kids here in the morning for their virtual learning. So, and then making sure people are aware of that schedule so that you can protect yourself. In one district that I work with, they've already thought about that, and their secondary teachers are going to have their synchronous lessons in the afternoon so that they can support their young children at home, and the elementary school is going to do all their synchronous video Google Classrooms in the morning. So hopefully your district administrators are on board with that as well, because it's just downright common sense.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was great as always. And thank you everybody who attended today, both sessions or one session, if you were only there for one. We do have one more webinar tomorrow at 12:30. It is addressing health barriers to learning, why, what, and how. We look forward to seeing you there if you can attend. And thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Akia. Thank you all participants for your active engagement. It was good to get to know you a little bit.